since music began. So music invokes emotion, and math encodes music. Tuning chakras, sound healing. I'm sure you've all been to the chiropractor and they use sound healing on you. Well, there's a little bit more to it. I visited a friend who does sound healing with crystals and tuning forks, so that he will put certain stones, crystals, on your chakra points, 7 chakras, which could be related to music too. You have 7 notes, and hit a tuning fork, put it on the stone or the crystal, and I've experienced this. I was expecting really nothing to happen, but for 6 days after I had this happen, my whole being was vibrating and I really was tuned. So like we said in the beginning, the planets all make notes in their cycles, and that everything sort of is relevant to sound. But this thing with sound healing, with the numbers and with GeoMusic, we might be able to improve a little bit on sound healing and use certain types of stones, certain types of tuning forks, certain notes to produce an effect on the patient. And there are people that are working on that stuff too, but I've experienced it myself, so I do know that it works, tuning the chakras. I'd like to talk briefly about gematria. Gematria numbers, they're in the code, 144 being the most sacred of all. I got all of these pages and pages of stuff, of letters that were sent to me, stuff from the shaman Hannah. We're assuming now that you've been paying attention to the code and know what the code is all about, that it's the grid system, proven by Karl Monk through the latitudes and longitudes and the positions of monuments and mounds to be all relative to one another and all laid out by maybe one master plan. And so all the stuff that I got on gematria got me started thinking about different tunings. We showed before that the international standard of tuning is 440. So what happens if we change that? See, there's a million conflicting references in the libraries of what the standard of tuning is. It was something different before the 1880s. And if you use 432 instead of 440, instead of these fractional numbers, you get basically whole numbers and gematria numbers that are linked to the code, that are used in the code a lot, like 108, 216, all sorts of things. So actually we might be blinded a little bit by our international standard of tuning. What I did do with our international standard of tuning was quite interesting. You can find this in the code newsletters. If you write to, we'll give out the address right now, Carl P. Monk, M-U-N-C-K, P.O. Box 147, Greenfield Center, New York, zip code 12833, and ask for some of the newsletters. You can find this one in there. Here's some of the linking that I did to pyramids and music. What I did was I applied the cycles per second of making A440, and I simply just divided it all into 12s. I divided up the music circle into 12s. And the measurement that in this book, Peter Tompkins, Mysteries of the Mexican Pyramids, they give a measurement of the distance between the sun and moon pyramids as being 763 meters. In feet, that's 2,053.333 feet. Well, by the relative orbital distance of Mercury, and it through a completely different way, I believe it was Hugh Harleston said that there was the Avenue of the Dead, which is in between the two pyramids, was like a guitar, the way it was laid out, the increments and the intervals, all being laid out to this ratio in meters. This one right here, this 105.94631. He saw that the sort of like frets on a guitar that this Avenue of the Dead was laid out much like a guitar into that ratio. Well, I found that the amount of feet between numbers are used. I wanted to talk a little bit about Jordan Maxwell and his controlled. And we can't really blame the government because we put them there. And it's about secret governments and lots of other stuff. But definitely Jordan Maxwell would check out all that stuff. I think that we're in such a state of denial that we really need to learn how to become informed in the first place and find these alternative information that is out there and that is real. In fact, don't just take what I say and believe anything I say about the code. Get it right to that address. All the numbers are correct. It can be checked out with maps and everything, and it's absolutely real. So there's a lost science. I mean, this other book here, Fingerprints of the Gods, I did a book review for this in Perceptions magazine, and they have an article about the code in Perceptions magazine also. But Fingerprints of the Gods basically proves or agrees with all of Carl's work without even knowing about any of it. This goes through a whole long series of explanations and proof and theories about lost civilizations, highly advanced civilizations that were around, the ones who are responsible for the code and these pyramids and probably this whole music theory, since it is related. It's another book that sort of confirms the whole thing. So basically what I'm saying is, don't just take what I say, go in and check out the information yourself and go from there. And I want to talk a little bit also about the Earth grid and how it's being destroyed and wrecked. There's the site of more mineral springs. They're dumping in pollutants to this fountain of youth. Ponce de Leon was searching for the fountain of youth in Florida, and if you read the code, you find out that the pyramids in Giza, they encode that the exact center intersect of more mineral springs, and pointing out that there's water there. How did they know that? I don't know, but I do know that right now it's being destroyed, it's being polluted, it's being wrecked. And I want to talk a little bit about this. There's a site right near here where I live. I call it Cardboard Hills, an Indian burial mound, and I'm absolutely sure it's part of the code. It's in there. It was wrecked and destroyed and covered up, and they built a big house on there. So my whole point is that there is, three things to sustain life: the air, food, and water, and we pollute all three. So we're ruining this ancient grid system. We're ruining it all. It's all being destroyed, and I think it's worth a mention. It's not only bad to ourselves, but to every life form on this planet, the destruction of these monuments, since they're not completely and fully figured out yet. Viracocha. This might take a little while. Viracocha, the demigod of Peru. This is actually where this symbol comes from. It came to me a different way, and then I was pointed out to it, just like I was pointed out to all this work through a series of lucid dreams. This is what led me to all this, and then it checked out to be all right, and I wondered what the symbol is, and it turns out this Viracocha, who, if you study the Nazca lines, is supposedly responsible for creating the Nazca lines. And all of the monuments and all these things, he came out of the sky. It's this whole long story, and he's holding this symbol. But my point is, if you look up the myths and legends and all that, Viracocha taught his lessons in a song. So we have another little tiny mini relationship of these sacred sites, like the Nazca lines, which is in there, which is related to song or music again. So we're going to get into some more concrete proof of this, but here's just some little ones. In fact, I'd like to show you the Nazca lines, because I had to go to about 20 different libraries to get this stuff, because I couldn't find a book on all of it. What the Nazca lines are is they're just miles and miles and miles of these lines that span out all over the place in Peru, and they can only be seen from the sky. So Carl just recently found out that they are in the code. And they are part of the code, they're one of the connections here. And basically Viracocha is the one who supposedly built them, although now it is still a mystery. We still do not know who really built the Nazca lines. The reason I mention this is this symbol also. It sort of looks like, oh, this one on the wall over here, which is one of the Nazca lines. But if you want to get a shot or zoom in of that symbol right over there, it's one of the Nazca lines. I will look for this packet. Okay, here we go. Why is this important? Why is this even in the video? Why is this involved at all? Well, this is what got me started. Through a whole series of experiences that led me to all this. Began with the Nazca lines. I had some very lucid dreams about the Nazca lines, the symbol. Let me try and find a good one here for you. This is basically from all these different libraries. I had to Xerox copies of books because it's hard to find a book with all of them, but there's about 200 animal figures also. Stuff like this. They're all in the code. This one on top here is called the hummingbird. And the reason why I even bring this up is that they were just recently discovered by Carl that they are in the code. They're very mysterious. No one's figured them out. Hundreds of feet, hundreds of miles long. There's thousands and thousands of them. If I can just show you a couple more. I mentioned earlier about Blythe, California, and it's a similar figures in Blythe, California that are just like the Nazca lines, glyphs or markings in the ground that can only be seen from the air. As I showed earlier, that symbol of the augmented force. Here's one. I don't know how great you're going to get this. On top is another bird, and on the bottom is a dog. But if you go out and look, you can find this stuff. I know this isn't a great shot, but go out and look up the Nazca lines. They're in the code, and they're extremely interesting. They probably also have musical lessons in them, if that myth is true. Let me try and find one more here. I know there's a big spider. Here is the symbol that points the way to all the Nazca lines, this trident here. Which can only be seen from the air, just like the other ones. Now, the reason I bring up Nazca lines is before I even knew about the code, and before I began GeoMusic or working anything with that, I was going nuts studying this for about 6 months, looking up the Nazca lines, reading about them, Maria Wright, German mathematician, who was studying the lines for her entire life, found many astronomical relationships to them. What happened to me right after I started studying this is I got a visit from the Department of Defense, who came right to my house and basically said, don't study the Nazca lines. I didn't even think about it until later that, who was this guy? So I bring this up. It's part of the beginning of this work, is actually a whole study for about a year or two on UFOs, alien abductions, all this stuff that you read about that you normally think is nonsense. That's there's a lot to it if you find the right information. Because there is a lot of nonsense about those types of subjects. But there's a lot of good mathematical stuff too. I think the code is probably the best, even though it doesn't prove there was aliens or anything, but it proves there was this highly advanced, technologically proficient civilization that existed a long, long time ago. So here's just a little pyramid model that I constructed and put the symbol on there, because you can see that it makes these squares around the pyramid. But basically, the pyramid shape itself. This is in another book, and it's proven that it preserves things. In other words, this is just made out of cardboard, but the shape itself, you could put a piece of meat under this, and then another piece of meat out that's not under a pyramid, and the piece of meat that's under the pyramid is going to last much longer, be preserved more. Why? Just because of the shape. The shape itself is what focuses cosmic energies. Just like some of the hats and like a dunce cap that they used to wear, which would actually trigger things in your brain to make you smarter. So these shapes, just the shape itself, is very, very important. And of course, everything relates to music because everything is vibrations and cosmic energy and all that type of stuff. It's all musical, as we said in the little intro in the beginning, that it's all musical. Everything is vibrations. So there's this song that's playing out there with the planets. And I know we're jumping around a little bit here, but stuff like, how did Beethoven compose after he became deaf? Through mathematics. He knew music theory. He didn't have to hear it. He just knew the math of music and was able to compose. So again, reiterating, math is music, music is math. So we're connecting something that's seemingly cold, math that's, boring or whatever, with music that's very, very emotional, rich with the power of emotions. We were talking about emotions earlier. It was Eric Clapton who said that he didn't know that he thought it was an experience that only happened to him, where he'd be on stage and he would get in a zone and he'd be playing his guitar and he'd be so engrossed in the music. And he'd be jamming out and he'd be in this zone where he could just do no wrong and make no mistake on his notes or anything, and really feel like he was outside himself, so that he's sort of outside himself, viewing himself, and he thought that he was the only person that this happened to. Well, all musicians have experienced this, and that it happens to almost everyone, where you get in this zone, this altered state from playing music. Why? Because music is mathematical and it's related to the universe, it's related to everything. So everything is music. So what I'm trying to do is break this down and look at music on a more intricate level, look at the numbers and the frequencies and how they relate. We're going to get to that in a couple of seconds, how some of the numbers relate to these pyramids and all that. But it's definitely emotional, and it involves many things. It encompasses many things. Music does. So 432 is an important number. If you want to use that standard of tuning, I did this with that standard of tuning. With the Temple of the Warriors, which is, I got this from the code. And the Temple of the Warriors basically has 20 statues or 20 posts on top, or tuning forks, or whatever you want to call them. And Carl has determined that the CI, the center intersect of it, is 20, which relates to that. I found that when you use a 432 scale, the latitude is the 2592, becomes an E note. And if you look at the diagram or go to the site, you can find out that they're split up into 4 sections. 4/4, which could mean a 4/4 timing. 4 could mean the key signature of E. There's also this one post that's in front of it that could mean 1 sharp for E minor. So it may be saying E in that standard of tuning. I much prefer this 440 tuning because I found some really interesting stuff with that. But what is important is because the frequency can change in temperature. You can have, say, concert tuning, which is 445 so depending on temperature, you'll have a different standard of tuning. So the standard of tuning doesn't matter. It's that interval. It's that way of relating it, no matter what standard of tuning you're in. So actually, if you go to the pyramids of Giza and use 441, all of the sides and angles and feet and the height of it and everything become notes. So there's notes all over the place. Numerology or whatever you may want to call it, I don't know, but I wouldn't call it that. In the beginning, God said, "Let there be light." But before he said, "Let there be light," he said something. So sound came first. God spoke first. And sound always comes before light, because sound is converted into light, as we said earlier. So we want to touch on a few more points before we get into the concrete evidence here of how it's related, actually, in many different ways. I'm going to bring up a few other things. Basically, I mentioned the visit from the DOD. Also, what has happened is this video has been made a few times. The original version was sent out, and all the copies, except for one of them, were messed with in the mail. Strangely erased, came out in black and white, ran off the tapes, stolen or whatever. So something's been going on with this video as far as it hasn't been able to get out there. So this is actually like the third or fourth copy. So the mail's been definitely been tampered with as far as this video itself. When I first tried to make this, so these all could be coincidences. But if you read what Carl wrote in reaction to my articles on the sound circles, he mentions Project Harp and 30-degree intervals and many things. You got to look it up to where this theory can be used for thousands and thousands of applications. So there's actually thousands of applications for it. You know, we mentioned sound healing, the code, but there's millions more. You can use this for many things. So, I want to talk a little bit about that. And I'd like to take a brief pause before we will present the concrete evidence of the relationship of music and the pyramids. Temple of the Warriors Pyramid in Mexico. This is an overhead shot from above. This is from Carl Monk. It's in the code. It's his diagram. When we go into a 432 standard of tuning, this 25920, great cycle number, longitude of the place, and this 1296 both become E's. They're E notes. The frequency is an E. So we may have a key signature here. You have 12. These are the posts or statues or columns that are at the top of the thing. And right here you have a clear 12 musical number. There's only 12 notes. And over here you have a clear 4/4 timing. 4 and 4. It's common time. It's 4 equaling a quarter note. 4 representing a quarter note equals 1 beat per measure. And 1 beat equals 1 quarter note. It's a time signature. Well, key signature is giving you however many sharps or flats are in the key signature, so you can write it on the sheet music paper and the music can be followed. So this shows a key signature of E also, 4 sharps. Even this one guy here's 1 sharp would be E minor. So if you use a 432 standard of tuning, this thing becomes notes, E notes. And it's saying E major and E minor. It's that blend again. So another thing that I was looking at was I wanted to look at the degrees of this wheel. We have, again, the original music wheel with 84 points, 84 notes around the whole thing. So to find the amount of degrees, you could just simply take 360 degrees and divide it by 84, and you come up with the number 4.2857142. So if you want to relate this to the great cycle number 25920, you can divide, you take 25920, divide it by 4.2857142, the amount of degrees on each note, and it equals the nautical mile in feet, 6,048. So I have a relationship of this circle to dimensions of the Earth. Another good example of that would be to take the great cycle number 25,920, and this is how we can get the musical ratio. We'll get to that in a second here. Here's the Pyramid of the Moon from Karl Monk. And Karl shows us 8 terraces, 3 and 5. So you have a total of 8. Well, there's only one key signature. It's a rare one, G sharp, that has 8 sharps in its key signature because of the double sharp. That's a little advanced technical for music theorists, but it has the double sharp, so it has 8 sharps. The key of G sharp has 8 sharps. This is showing us 8 terraces. Well, where it's located at, its center intersect. As we study the code, you know what that is. It's exactly where it is, the moon pyramid up here. Its center intersect is this number, 6.489245881. That is a G sharp note in a very, very low octave. If we go over to the original table of numbers and you go down and look up G sharp, it's 830.60937. Well, that's in that octave. To get any octave, as you can see, 440A, you just double. So an octave above 440A is going to be 880. So you just double. To go lower in an octave for G sharp, you just divide by 2, divide by 2, divide by 2. If you keep dividing by 2, you get the 6.489 number. So the Pyramid of the Moon is showing us 8 sharps, and its actual center intersect is a G sharp note. Now, as I said earlier, if you take a 441 standard, it all works with Giza, so the different temperatures for different standards of tuning. One last little equation here. If you take the great cycle number and you simply just do square root, you square root twice, 2 times. Then you divide it by 2, take out your calculators, and take 25,920, press square root twice, divide it by 2. That's bringing it down 1 octave. So, I'm sorry, bringing it down, yes, 1 octave if you divide it by 2. And you take that number and square root twice, divide by 2, you get that 6.3 ratio that in Hugh Harlison and Peter Tompkins' book says is related to the polar diameter of the Earth. Well, if you take that number, that 6.3, and you square root it 5 times, you get this exact number, 1.05946.